me on the show. And wow, what a wonderful intro. I love it.
Well, thank you, Rita. I like to put the pedal to the metal. You got to grab them quick or you're going to lose them. But I guess because I brought it up, December 21st is right around the corner. I'm a little disappointed in the lack of conversation. I mean, what do you think? Is it the start date of the dawning of a new age of humanity or just another 9 to 5 work week? Because I've been waiting to buy my Christmas presents.
Well, I mean, I don't think that we're going to blow up or the world's coming to an end. Although, my little conspiracy theory mind goes, if something is going to happen, I could see the government going, hey, well, that sounds like a good day. Hit the red button. But as far as what's happening organically, I don't think so. With that said, there are, I'm going to say, so many people, okay, everybody, at least in the United States, that have really been holding their breath for the last couple of years. And I'm looking for us all to have the opportunity to finally exhale and start breathing again and move out of this place of fear that we have been held captive to so that we can actually have another day. It will be the dawn of another day, on that level, because we will be free from that level of oppression.
Well, that would be nice if that was the effect it had. I mean, I'm going to have fun with it. It will be the dawning of a new age for this man. No more soda, no more fast food, a more conscious attention to getting myself where I want to be. So it's really just a choice. And on a personal level, you can decide if the minds were right. Kind of like a New Year's resolution, but it lasts your whole goddamn life, not just halfway to Valentine's Day. You know what I mean?
Well, I think, December 21st this year is going to be more pivotal, definitely much more remembered than New Year's Day this year is going to be.
Well, yes, I hope at least that is true. But I do wish it was treated more like a global near miss car accident where, you take a breath, you wipe your brain, you're like, man, okay, now where do we want to go? If we're living our life, what do we want to do with it? Instead of waiting for this cosmic event to happen, this predetermined event where we're rescued from our predicament. And, the whole thing, it just seems like no one's talking about it. Doesn't seem to be out in the collective unconscious like I really wanted it to be and hoped it would be.
But really, it is.
Think so?
One of the things about it, like not that long ago, Harold Camping came out with these predictions that, the rapture was going to happen and, the apocalypse was going to begin. And there were circles of people that had heard of his predictions. But I think the 2012 thing has really gotten enough airplay, even in commercials, that there is an inkling, I think just about in the United States, especially, that most people, the majority of people, have heard something about it. And when you have something that they put out there in this manner, regardless of what you think is going to happen, there's still that little shred of, well, the world could end, Armageddon could begin. I mean, because we don't know. And so there's what we believe, and then there's still that where we doubt ourselves.
Yes, I hear you. And I want to switch gears a little bit to talk about your book, The Reason Why You Are Here. But before we do that, tell me a bit about this medical intuitive thing. That's your 9 to 5, you say. And what kind of effects have you seen? Is this energy healing? What's going on here?
Well, I mean, medical intuition is a assessment tool. So it's like going and getting an X-ray or
Okay,
an MRI, in a
gotcha.
very classical, traditional look at it. Because the medical intuitive's job is to look at the individual's body and give them some feedback as to what's going on. And so it's different from getting Reiki done or healing work done because it's not a healing modality. It's more like getting a psychic reading. It's so you and so but it's still really cool. And one of the things that I feel I bring to the table for people, in addition to being able to look at the physical body and say, well, I see this, there's inflammation here, there's this bump here, like I can energetically kind of remote view and touch their organs, and I'll touch their kidney and they might have a kidney infection going on. I'll be like, ow, 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 because
Wow.
I can feel the pain in their body. So there's that aspect to it, which is pretty cool. But one of the other things is that I'm able to feel into their emotional energy and help them understand what the thoughts and beliefs are that are causing them to manifest the illness in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that 80+% of all illness or stuff, there is a psychospiritual component. I mean, there are things called colds and viruses that you get a cold, you get a virus, you break your leg. There's not this whole big emotional piece, even though there are the individuals who say, well, there was a reason that you broke your leg. It's like, well, that's really not, what I'm looking for in a person. Many times, they are, I'm looking more for beliefs like I hate myself or
a daily struggle for me.
I hate my mother. Well, because those are the things that limit the flow of energy through the subtle body and create the disease in the first place.
I mean, it seems logical to me. I'm a definite believer that people can make themselves sick. I mean, I loathe my day job, and when I'm on my way to work, I'll usually manifest myself a headache or a stuffy nose or something, and I'm like, am I allergic to this place? But really, it's just a mental thing. And I mean, even a force like stress, an unseen force, is pretty accepted by the general medical community, the mainstream medical community, that there is a stress effect.
Well, I mean, but to me, stress is like such a generic global thing. It's like, what are you stressed about?
True.
That's really where it becomes the key. And I'm going to throw this out because, I have another book called Avoiding the Cosmic 2x4 that goes into this topic in much, much greater detail. And if you want, I can send you a copy of that and we can maybe do a show, excuse me, around that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be awesome. I'd love to take a look at that book. Let's talk about the book, actually, that you just recently wrote, Man-Made, The Reason for Your Visit to THC. I really do want to get into the chronology of our extraterrestrial gods, this timeline. But first, tell the people a little bit about the work and the research and the dedication it took to get this book out. I mean, we're not messing around here. You did quite a bit of research, am I right?
Oh, yeah. One of the things that we did is we would get a clue, like, what about this? What about the gods, and excuse me, and we would just follow the clue and follow it. And then, you might find a clue taking you over to this area. And so we'd follow that clue. I mean, because you would end up hitting some kind of a wall or a dead end, or it would just end. You would find, more than enough information than you need to really answer the question that you have. And so that's really how we addressed this, was by, we would find a myth in one culture and then look to a different culture around the world to see if we could find parallel myths there too. One of the things that we were adamant about was finding multiple myths that referred in essence to the same event that we were talking about in the book, because to us that validated that there was truth. And we're not talking about there's a Greek story and a Roman story. We're talking about there's a Greek story and maybe an Indian story, or a story that comes out of the Americas.
Gotcha.
To say, okay, we're talking about a global story, not just a local story.
Right, absolutely. And that is the most fascinating thing, is that at a time when cross-continental communication and travel was off the table as far as conventional history is concerned, these societies on different parts of the globe seem to have similar stories and myths, and I guess it creates a unified narrative. But, walk us through it. Let's take it from the top. Where does this origin story start?
Well, it starts in the beginning.
Makes sense.
If you read the narratives,
right.
And then it moves forward in time. I mean, one of the things that we were so blown away with were the parallels that we found around the world, starting with in the beginning, where the, the beginning of their creation narrative starts with, this null and void, or talking about energy on the water. I mean, there were a few images that came up over and over again, which says, well, unless they're talking about the same thing, then it would have to be
right.
They would be different. They would by necessity be different.
Of course. And these stories we're talking about, these earliest stories, are these the Sumerian texts? Because to my knowledge, there's nothing older, correct?
Well, there is the written chronicles that go back to the Sumerians, but the narratives, we believe, went back much, much, much further in time and were carried forward through oral traditions. But I'm going to throw a little caveat in here.
Okay.
As to where the earliest of stories, talking about the beginning of the planet and the very early history on the planet prior to mankind, as we know mankind being created, came from. So there is a gentleman named Bersius. He was a Babylonian priest who lived during the time of Alexander the Great. And one of the things that he mentions is that there were these creatures that were called Onaz, or at least one of them was called Onaz. They were not quite sure if that was a proper name or the name of these creatures, but the first one's name was Onaz. And he came during our prehistory, so this was prior to the flood, and taught mankind stuff. And so according to Bersius, these creatures appeared 6 different times on the earth, 3 times before the flood, 3 times after the flood. And it's also described by him that these creatures taught mankind their history. We have a parallel story. Okay, so we have this, half man, half fish, and there's this whole group of gods that are tied to the water, and have this like fish-like, reptilian-like characteristic. But we go across the ocean and we find, like the Aztecs, for example, say that Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, taught them their history. And so we have, stories of the gods telling mankind their history. And so one of the things that we contend, excuse me, is that the stories we have, these most ancient of legends, aren't our stories about the gods, but actually the gods telling us their stories.
Yeah, their own history, right.
And there's a number of reasons why that we think are supported when you look at myths where mankind is involved. Jason and the Argonauts, or, any of the stories where, the Trojan War, any of them. When the narrator talks about the gods, they're always separate. They're always on Mount Olympus. And when humankind interacts with them, they're always in this subservient kind of position, or you look at the like the Vedas in India, they're praying to the gods. It's like, oh God, please make my grain go good. Kind of like we pray today, hoping for salvation from the gods. But when you look at these earliest stories, the narrative isn't that way. The person telling the story is just right there in the middle of the action. And he doesn't have this positioning of awe and veneration toward the gods. And, the stories that come from this earliest period, the gods are represented as being really pretty awful. They're killing each other and conspiring against each other and destroying worlds. And the narrator isn't really even shocked by their bad behavior. And the only way that you could see that as being okay is if that was part of your culture. And an analogy I like to make is, if you're a member of a criminal gang, in East LA or Harlem or, wherever they hang out, and you're writing about your life, and the activities that are happening around you, there was a drive-by shooting yesterday.
Yeah, so
And it was,
casual.
yeah, but that's how those stories are presented as, oh yeah, there was a drive-by, the Crips went after the Bloods and these guys, and one of the Crips over here was like doing, that's how those stories read.
Absolutely agree. Going to Catholic school growing up, reading the Bible, I thought death was handled so casually, killing people left and right. I want to throw this asshole to the lions. I want you to kill your kid. I got plagues coming at you. Everybody's sacrificing their firstborn, crosses. Death is so casual in the Bible.
I just want to know, when in our history, in mankind's history, did God go from being this like mean, bump everybody off kind of person to he's a kind and loving God?
Well, yeah. See, that's the point right there, that I think Catholics decided to use their religion for control through fear. And it seems like that was the time where they went around stamping out other religions. Anything pagan became satanic. And we're taught in school that they were just spreading their religion, but they were rewriting history by force, killing anyone who wouldn't accept this newly designed control framework. That, to me, is why there's such an emphasis on record destroying. That's the one thing I remember from school, is everywhere they came through, just destroy those records. I mean, that's something you'd need to do if you were trying to rewrite their history. And then you make God a jealous, angry, power-hungry monster, and then you force people to try to identify with that, creating a huge internal conflict and creating an excuse for bad behavior. Well, that's what we reward in this society. And I don't know. To me, that was more about that.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, fortunately, there are still some ancient sources that are left, that have come down to us. But then we get a certain amount of literature, from the Americas that were written down by the early Spanish chroniclers, which are my favorite.
Yeah.
I love these guys because they are so prejudiced.
Now we're talking.
And can I just read you this one little portion?
Yeah.
Because in this one passage, you can see that the myth that they're talking about was actually part of their cosmology, because this chronicler has such a level of disbelief in the narrative he's hearing. And so this is like one of my favorite passages. According to the most certain and true opinion, there could not have been inhabitants in this land before the universal deluge, for it is certain that all men sprang from our father Adam, and that in the period between Adam and Noah, so wide a dispersal could not have taken place. How was it possible that these Indians could have any knowledge of the deluge?
Yeah, wow.
Which says to me, they have a flood story.
Yeah. Right.
And it must have sounded pretty much like the Christian story, because this guy doesn't believe them.
Well, yeah. I mean, it backs up what I was saying before, but also that sounds like the same kind of shit Sean Hannity's putting out today. Everyone is so cocksure, so pompous, so sure that the stuff they've been brainwashed with must be the truth. And that's why I'm not really sure of fucking anything.
Oh, me either. And what I find interesting is that there are so many people, and, please don't send any mean cards or letters, anybody that's listening, but there are so many people that feel a need to hang on to the biblical text to justify biblical text through myth, that it just doesn't work. I mean, one of the things that we did was we put our Bible and our preconceived notions to the side, because there was no way to allow the myths to talk if we were going to try to prove something else. We didn't go in trying to prove anything. We went in trying to just uncover what were they saying? What is our history without bias? And let me tell you, there were areas that we thought, we were going to go, and it turned around that was not what the myth said. Period. It was like,
Yeah. Well, let's get into these myths. Let's go back to before humans, because a big part of the old stories is genetic manipulation and the creation of humans.
mhm.
Let's talk about that. Who created us? How did they get here? Where did they come from? And where do these stories come from? Rita, what's the deal?
Well, the stories I think came from the gods, that they told us. Um, there are multiple texts that talk about the creation of mankind, and one of the things that you find is that there were actually multiple instances, and I'm just kind of summarizing, the conclusion I've come to based on this material. We offer everyone to make their own conclusions reading the material, but this is the conclusion that we've come to, is that there have been multiple rounds of genetic engineering that have happened, with mankind being the most recent round of genetic engineering that happened. But the narratives tell us that the gods created mankind, and they, we were not the, first and iteration. We find in, like in the Popol Vuh that comes out of Mesoamerica, that there were multiple creations. They made one man out of mud, and when it rained, he disintegrated. And they made another man out of sticks, but he was really stupid, and so they got rid of him. And then finally they decided to use corn to make mankind, and they made mankind using 4 different color corn: white, red, black, and yellow.
Oh, shit.
Kind of interesting,
Yeah.
thinking about the demographics on the planet.
Yeah. Especially when you consider what we're told about civilization at the time. They couldn't have traveled around the globe. They couldn't have known all the races on the planet. How did they nail down all the different races without that knowledge, without cross-continental travel,
Well, that's because it was just corn. It wasn't, races,
Right.
quote unquote.
How silly of me. I'm being ridiculous.
Right, but then you look at like the Sumerian text, and they talk about, again, multiple creations, and one of them couldn't stand up by himself. One of them urinated, couldn't hold its urine.
Oh,
They made
God.
a female one that was not able to conceive. And they went through 6 or 7 different versions of man until we were finally created. So there's a pretty consistent storyline of these multiple creations around the world.
And why do you think they created man? As a slave race?
I like to use a different word.
A gentler word?
I believe that mankind is a domesticated race.
Ah.
Now, when you're domesticated, you work. Like we have horses are domesticated. Donkeys are domesticated. Camels are domesticated, and they are domesticated work animals. Now, thank God we're like not domesticated to have for lunch. Right. I just don't really want to be an alien burger.
Yeah. Who does?
But and so slave, kind of a strong word, but a domesticated work animal. Yeah, I think so. I think so.
That could really describe us today still.
Well, we have such a strong work ethic. We look at like dogs, and there are certain dogs that are bred to herd animals or hunt, chase after birds or whatever. And a friend of mine has had this one dog. I have a little dog. I'm always telling dog stories anyway. And so it was a Sheltie, which is a herding dog. And when her kids were young, if she wanted one of the kids to come over, the dog would go and herd the kids over, because it's just bred into it. And we as humans are so bred to work. If we're not busy doing something, we feel like there's something wrong.
Yeah.
But it's true.
No, right. There's plenty of people that think if people aren't busy doing something, then there's something wrong, especially if your last name's Rothschild.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, from these stories, you push back human history far further than the conventional. I think the number is 1.5 to 3 million years ago in the book.
Correct.
Well,
Correct.
well, which texts were you reading that got you to that time frame? I know these stories came from the creator race, but where would someone go? What could they read to study the source material if they were interested?
Well, one of the things that we did was look at the mythology and then go, where does that place us in, human evolution, of what we know of human evolution? I mean, there are a lot of authors that say, oh, well, there was the alien intervention at like 40,000 years ago or 100,000 years ago. I mean, they throw a bunch of dates out. But when you look at some of the myths, for example, there's the story of Prometheus, the very famous story of Prometheus, and Prometheus gives mankind fire. And because of his digression, he is chained to a rock, and every night an eagle comes and eats his liver, which grows back by the next day, so that the eagle can come and eat it again. And so 40,000 years ago, we definitely had fire. 100,000 years ago, we had fire. And so our thinking, because there is this common narrative of the gods, miscellaneous ones around the world, of the gods giving us fire. So our thought was, well, when did we have control of fire, or when were we using fire? Maybe not making it, because we know that was a later development, but using it in a controlled way, because there's evidence of mankind using fire in a controlled way. And that took us back to about, between 1.5 million years ago and 3 million years ago. One of the other line in myth is that they gave us tools to work with. And, the earliest tool users was Homo hablatus. He was 3 million years ago, and right around that same time, in between Homo hablatus and Homo erectus, tied to that are a number of genetic changes that also happened, until when we get to Homo erectus, it's kind of like all of the major changes. We're walking completely upright. Our toes are in alignment. We don't have a big toe that sticks out to the side anymore. We don't have any hair anymore. We are starting to live in small cultural groups. We are building little tents or houses to stay in, temporary shelters, which are the very beginnings of culture. And then there was one little enigmatic text that I thought was very interesting. In the Bible, when God kicks Adam and Eve out of Eden, God makes them clothes out of animal hair, animal skins to wear. And so if we're talking about a more contemporary time for even Adam and Eve, we weren't wearing animal skins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, but the animal skins fit in with that Homo erectus time period.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting and awesome about these old texts and myths, is that we're taught that they're just stories, but when you lay them out on the timeline, they might show a little bit of truth. I mean, I just finished Philip Coppin's new book, and he talks about the Iliad and the Odyssey. That's his example. And for so many years, people thought Homer was just making up stories, but they found some geographical evidence and locations that fit the descriptions of Homer. And, we figured out Troy was a real place. And so you wonder how much of it is just an historical account.
Mm-hmm.
But then you got other parts of the stories that get really weird, with a guy getting his liver eaten out every day. And you just got to say, I guess they took some poetic license with that one.
But Prometheus was a god, and so he was immortal.
Well, okay. When I'm hearing the word gods in this context, I'm just thinking humanoid alien. I mean, humanoid beings that came here in the past. Is that not what we're talking about?
Well, I think that the original progenitor gods that came here, which goes back even further than the 3 million years ago, were definitely alien. It seems pretty clear to me, at least, that they came in some kind of a ship. But from that original group, there have been a number. I have to sit here and count here. Two other groups prior to mankind that we believe were genetically engineered by this progenitor group, with mankind being the final group. And so, are they alien? Not so much, but are they human? No. That's like no, capital letters, underlined, exclamation point. They were definitely not human.
Right. We talking like a transdimensional, multidimensional being, like beings of light, that kind of
I
thing?
mean, really hard to say. You know, one of the later groups that were created, actually three groups. I'm going to take that back. There were three groups prior to man. One of the groups that was created were the giants. Now, in mythology, there are two sets of giants. There were the Titan giants, which, I like to joke around. They're big, like they can pick you up and bite your head off big.
Jesus.
They were giants.
Yeah.
And then there were the 7 to 9 foot, 12-foot giants that we're hearing a lot about these days, and they're finding bones, but they were much more recent. They were around during this period of Adam and Eve and the flood, and, they got annihilated during the flood.
And I love how so many multiple cultures have flood stories of battles in the sky, stuff like that. But it gets real hazy for me because it's never really laid out in a timeline. So let's say you got this first group of aliens who come here. They start trying to create a worker race, a domesticated man, and they end up making us. What's next? They start entering our women, mating with the women they find fair. Is that the next milestone? The next bullet point in the story?
Okay, so they make us. So we have like the Adam and Eve story, and they're kicked out of Eden.
Okay.
And and I'll just use the biblical narrative here because there were people that were on the land, and this isn't just biblical, but the gods are getting pissed off because they're not worshiping them or venerating them in the way that they wanted. They were really picky about that. In the biblical narrative, the reason of the flood is because the sons of God mated with the daughters of men, and brought forth the men of renown. Now, I just want to throw this out there because there are a lot of people that claim that the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men are the Nephilim. They are the giants. And I highly, highly, highly disagree. Because if you read the narrative, what I was talking about just a second ago earlier was that the giants, the earthborn, the Nephilim, were in existence prior to the creation of Adam and Eve. So if you read the line, in those days, the Nephilim walked the earth. The answer would be yes. In those days, the Nephilim walked the earth. And so how could a group that was already in existence be born out of the torrid relationship between the sons of God and the daughters of men?
True. Okay, now.
Okay. However.
Sorry, but how did the Nephilim get here? Were they already
here?
Well,
they were already here.
Okay.
They were, in Greek mythology, the earthborn were born of the blood of the castrated Uranus that fell on the earth.
Oh my God.
So they were yet another genetically manipulated group. One of the things that we believe is that the earlier gods, the Titan gods, the giant gods, and the other ones that came before them were not able to live on the surface of the planet. That there was some issue, we think it might have been something having to do with ultraviolet radiation, but they did not live on the surface because all of the stories refer to them living in the sky living deep beneath the water or living deep within the earth. And there really aren't stories of those earlier gods walking on the surface of the planet.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect because a big criticism of the alien conspiracies of today is you've got these stories of both the good aliens trying to influence us to take care of each other and the planet from behind the scenes, and also the evil David Ickean reptile aliens that enslave, control, and reign over us, also from the shadows. So it is interesting that even in the old text, they weren't just out in the open all that much. Seems to be a common thread that's been going on for a while now.
Hmm. Well, and it was interesting. I mean, I've already have 2 pages of notes for a revised and expanded edition because I'll be talking to someone or be in the middle of an interview and someone will throw something out like, "Well, have you heard this?" And I'm like, "Hmm, no, but let me make a note so I can go research it because we took it as far as we could go." But then you get people that are, will throw, like somebody was saying, Edgar Casey talked about genetic engineering in Atlantis, which, I have some beliefs about the nature of Atlantis in the first place, but that was yet another tie, another parallel from another source. Anyway, um,
Well, what do you think about Atlantis? Because I've had several guests talk about their Atlantis theories. Do you think it was just a culture that was slightly more advanced that passed some of their knowledge on to the Egyptians? Because that seems to be the most common belief.
well, see, you read the book, so I think you're going to like this. I mean, obviously, we did not address it in the book.
Right.
But this was the original thought came from, and I'm going to give him credit, Giorgio Zuccolo. On one of the episodes of Ancient Aliens,
Yeah.
who was talking about Atlantis, and his comment was when the flood was happening, and I'm just going to use what he said, but when the flood was happening, Atlantis, as opposed to sinking, took off because it wasn't an island, it was a ship. And when he said it, I thought, well, that's stupid.
Yeah, me too.
How could this little ship account for an island?
Right.
It just really it didn't make sense.
Yeah, it is far-fetched, but have you found any evidence to support that possibility?
Oh. No, I mean, in thinking about it, of course, after the fact. Okay, so one of the things that we learned from mythology is about the home of the gods, heaven, the home of the gods. And these homes are, it's not like, Zeus has a condo in heaven. Zeus has this palace, and all of the other gods have palaces that are huge and palatial, and there are trees, and there are animals, and there's, gardens and farms in heaven. In the Indian text, they talk about these sabas. And the smallest one, without going through this whole thing, the smallest one in American measurements would be, according to the Mahabharata, 300 miles wide by 500 miles long. So it's huge. Now, even if it's exaggerated, they still describe it as being able to house hundreds of thousands of people. Now, if one of these, okay, so all right, so we have these ships, or we have heaven. Now, mythology clearly tells us that these things could go anywhere they wanted to, under the water, in the air, at the will of the owner. Okay, so we got these ships that are going around. But if you think about it, take it to the next step. Okay, so Atlantis was in the middle of the ocean. So who controls the ocean? Enki controls the ocean. He's the god of water, the god of fertility. He's associated with Poseidon, the god of the oceans. His home is in the water. Enki is also tied to the creation of mankind story. The little tidbit, which really kind of nailed it, even though I haven't researched it, was that Edgar Casey talked about genetic engineering happening in Atlantis. Well, Enki is the god that was responsible for the genetic engineering of man.
Huh.
So could Atlantis have been Enki's home?
Yeah, it is a possibility.
It's possible.
Yeah. Now, the two things I always hear are we're talking about the flood here. The flood story is very prominent, but also the giant battles in the sky, the wars in the sky. Which one of these things came first?
The alien war stories.
Okay. So they created humans, then there was this big power struggle, big war happened, and then the flood. So how much time passed here?
Well, actually, the war happens first, and then they create man.
Oh. Oh shit. Okay.
Because once mankind, like I've just started reading the Mahabharata, and so I'm not quite sure how that story fits into what's going on. Um, because that's the story where it has all the ships flying around and all this stuff
Yeah.
going on.
Flying
And so
carpets
I'm
and
not
stuff.
really right, and I'm not really sure where that fits in time wise yet.
Yeah, that's where it gets hazy for me too because I just try to put this into a timeline and they never really say. And of course, they didn't use the same calendar, so it's pretty much impossible for them to say. But after thousands of years, it's even harder for us to conceive of putting this all together.
But the majority of the wars that happen, especially the big war for control between the sky god and the earth god, happened millions of years ago. We put it at four. I have to sit here and think for a second. 450 million years ago.
Wow.
432 million years ago.
Okay, so where does that number come from? Because that's such a long time ago.
Well, one of the things that you find is that okay, let me just throw this in. So there's the original race of gods, the progenitor gods who create a race of beings who are the Titans, those giants that can bite your head off. And so they're in control. They're in control of the earth. And so another group, which is the sky gods, now want to have control over the earth. And this is where we have this giant war that happens. Now, tied to this story of an epic battle is, one of the things we did was we looked for commonalities within the narrative. There was a flood. This period is known as the Golden Age, and there were these like taglines in narrative. And one of the things that we used to identify this war, because there were multiple wars, was the tagline that says, and then the gods put the sun, the moon, and the stars into the sky. Okay, so that gave us the placement. Okay, but one of the things that is also tied to this story is about terraforming the planet. And so Tiamat in Sumerian literature is killed by Marduk or Enki or Enlil, and her body is cut in half, and her, half of her body becomes the surface of the earth, and it becomes the mountains and the trees, and her blood becomes the water, which sounds like it was terraforming. But when did all of that happen in the chronology of the planet? When were trees created? When did life move from under the water to the surface of the earth? And it all happens around that 450, 430 something million years ago. And so that is why we put it at that period. And what was interesting is when I started researching that period, because they talk about the mountains and the land being built, during that time, the earth was really, the bulk of it was covered with water. And that was one of the biggest periods of mountain building on the planet, was during that period of time.
Right on. So, okay, we got the flood. Is that the time when most of these alien races, these other races, left the main stage after this giant water cataclysm?
Very much so. I mean, they definitely backed off into the background. One of the things, it gets a little sketchy in parts. But one of the things is that we feel like the gods, by necessity, had to back off because there was, so many died because of the flood. because they all didn't get off the planet, and so because there aren't that many in numbers, mankind was pretty much left on his own. And so we believe that the gods came back and taught mankind stuff, taught mankind civilization, taught mankind all of this stuff, and just kind of worked in the background. And that's because there's kind of a blank period after the flood, until like civilization that happens, unless you go with that, the flood happened 6000 BC.
Well, let's take a second here because this is December of 2012 after all. And if you think of time as secular, if we did have a huge global disaster, what would happen? Well, the world's elite would be protected in secret underground bunkers that we can't get access to. Then, when the smoke and chaos cleared, they could come out and establish an economy and a society and start their reign all over again. So I could see really how that could be the reality. But it would be such a long time for these bloodlines to maintain power in secret.
However, well, no, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, but I have a little however.
Let me have it.
The ones that are in power are not the underground ones. It's the sky gods. Who do we venerate? Who do we look up to? Who,
Yeah, just the phrase "look up."
It's not the underground ones.
Right, up is good, down is evil.
They're vilified. They're evil, incarnate.
Yeah, well, history's written by the winners.
That's right. Exactly. Not a very popular thought, but yeah, I think it's true. I mean, I feel like, even in mythology, that fertility god, the one that's associated with the creation of mankind, and teaching mankind, which was why the angels, quote unquote, fell, uh, is usually associated with with the Enki character, and and that he's a trickster, which in and of itself has kind of a bad connotation, that he's doing something bad. But the reality is that that character that was looking after mankind's best interests, and I feel like that person was acting from their conscience versus acting from a place of power and control.
Well, not to take this into a weird place, but yes, history is written by the winners, so if Lucifer lost a great battle, then of course he would be written as the enemy, and sometimes I wonder if there's not at least a little of that going on in our historical accounts of World War II. Because yes, Hitler was a bad guy, killed a lot of people, but the side I'm interested in, the aspects I care about, is the occult stuff that I've heard about. I mean, there are a lot of parallels to me between ancient alien bloodlines and seeking to bring that back through breeding a master race.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like in Hitler's inner circle there was a belief in the occult and resurrecting ancient technologies, but our side has done such a good job as painting him as just an evil monster. And it seems like it could be a convenient tactic to take the focus away from those ideas and just say, look, he was an evil racist, and if you start looking into this, you're an evil racist too, so don't do it. But do you think there could be any connection between the Nazi concepts of a master race and some belief that they were only trying to get back to that pure Nephilim bloodline?
I mean, it could be. I mean, I think that, and this is one of the topics that I have planned for yet another book, which is going to look at the underworld as well as ritual and prayer, because even when you go back to some of the very early myths, there is this requirement by the gods. So we have the progenitor gods, and they create, their first race of beings. But there are issues about veneration, about ritual, about sacrifice, and I don't understand why. And I there's something there. There's something so there. Anyway, I forget what the question was.
No big
Sorry.
deal. I was just getting weird with the Nazis, but there is a split in the way that we see the past, because you have some who describe these ancient cultures as more harmonistic. They had superior technologies that were more natural. They were able to move these huge stones, framed societies are almost framed as like a paradise, and then you have a more mainstream idea that people were barbaric, performing human sacrifices before breakfast, lunch, and dinner, dropping virgins in the volcano, you know? And I just wonder, what were they really like?
But the joke is that human sacrifice was done all over the world. I mean, it's not just, we just, the Europeans just hadn't done it in a long time. So, they're pretty judgmental about that. And even, you were talking about Hitler, the eugenics movement, which was about, selectively breeding individuals, which shocked me, originated in the US.
Really? I think that's news to me.
Yeah, that was Stan Friedman and Kathleen Marden. They had done a whole chapter in a book talking about the eugenics movement. But yeah, it was started in the US. And it's like, well, then how can we say that they were bad if we started it in the first place?
And, we had concentration camps too. Most people know that. So again, history rewritten as the winners of the conflict like it. The heroes beat the bad guys. Doesn't really matter who did what. And there are no stories in history where the bad guys win. Funny how that is.
Mm-hmm.
But let's get back to the good stuff. What would you say is your favorite story of man interacting with an extraterrestrial race?
About man interacting, or just one of my favorite mythological stories?
Well, a mythological story that you think might have some validity or describe an actual event.
Okay, then I would have to say Moses. Moses. No. I mean, I remember reading the Old Testament, or not the whole Old Testament, but parts of the Old Testament, especially Genesis, because I just find that book fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But my favorite part is Moses is in the has led everybody out of Egypt, and they're in the desert, and he goes to Mount Sinai, and he's going to go hang out with God on Mount Sinai, and and then it starts thundering and lightning, and the top of Mount Sinai is surrounded in a cloud, and God wants to talk to the people and starts, talking directly to them, and it scares the crap out of everybody. And so they tell Moses, like, no, you talk for us. You talk for us. We want to get out of here. And so many people say, oh, well, I mean, they forget that part, that there were other people involved and not just Moses in that whole story. And from a Jewish perspective, that is one of the reasons why they celebrate Passover. I mean, there's having the spirit of death Passover, but it's also tied to, this interaction, this one-on-one interaction with God, that, why would a group make up such a far-fetched story and then make it so important that that story is passed down parent to child, generation to generation ad infinitum?
True. And another weird thing that comes up a lot in these cultures is stories of a return. Even, the Jesus story, he's supposed to return. Quetzalcoatl's supposed to return. What's up with that? Do you think that there is a return coming? Do you think there's any validity to that?
There is definitely a consistency of that storyline. And well, you're kind of a conspiracy guy, so I'm just going to throw this. I'm just going to throw this out there, which I was so not put in the book.
I'm ready.
Okay, so the flood happens now. The gods are priming us and domesticating us. I mean, because we're pretty freaking domesticated. You
That's
take
true.
away our internet, and we're a lost cause. And the younger generation, I don't know how old you are, Greg, but my kids would be lost. No internet, no cell phone, no remote control. And so I feel like there has been yet this next level of domestication where, putting your personal stuff out on the cloud, I'm sorry, I just have an issue with that. And they're just like, oh, it's okay. Oh, look, but you can put all your songs out there. And I'm like, yeah. And then the government can just peer in.
Right.
I don't think so.
And the cloud is such a happy word.
I know. Well, that's where the gods are. Ooh.
Right.
Anyway, somebody said, but the gods kind of drop off the map a really long time ago. I mean, if
Right.
you think about like Moses's encounter with the gods, what, 1500 BC, something in that area. Not too much interaction that we find after that point in time. Don't really know about Native American sources if they have more current encounters, but we can kind of place Moses somewhere. Um, but that's not even 5,000 years.
Hmm.
And so in the life of the gods, that's like the next day. And so could they be just waiting for us to become even more domesticated so they can come back in and do whatever?
Right.
I think it's entirely possible.
Well, and there's some people who speculate that the whole theme of that the Greys are actually kind of genetically manipulated creatures from a different race who sends them forth to do these abductions and to create these problems and to create a fear around them. And then this other race who you don't see will come in and save us from their own creation as the good
Hmm.
guys. That's a popular theme. But, if you had to speculate about aliens' interaction with us today, would you say it's non-existent? Is it in the background? Is it there? Are they the ruling elite? What would you speculate?
I've never really been a big UFO person, and I'm
Hmm.
just saying that up front. But after researching this book, my belief that they were definitely here in the past, that they definitely had significant, all right, all the control over everything that happened on this planet. I they weren't just like doing a flyby and just coming in and just doing something and then leaving again, because historically speaking they've been here since the beginning of time, and definitely since the beginning of mankind. So why would they just go?
Why would you give that up?
With that said, we hear stories of bases, alien bases underground. We hear
Yeah.
stories of USOs, of ships coming out from under the water. And obviously, we have ships that are flying around in the air, which those three areas, and only those three areas, parallel the three major areas that you find the gods in myth.
Right. I had Stan Deo on a couple of weeks ago, and he talks about a black ops facility that he had worked at, and then he left it, and his intel from people who were still there is that Greys came in, they worked with them, and then the Greys sort of like marginalized us and pushed us out, and that these underground bases in some cases are actually controlled by an extraterrestrial race. But I guess I just wonder why. Like, why? What's their motivation? Why would they spend their life hiding out in a cement bunker underground to somehow influence us? It's like why wouldn't they just come out and say, "Hey, we're here. We are smarter, more intelligent, have better technology, and you'll serve us."
Yeah. And what their motives are. I mean, why they came here in the first place is kind of like the $94,000 question. Don't know. There is absolutely nothing that even remotely goes into that topic, mythologically speaking.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a story that I want to be true. I would love there to be bases underground controlled by aliens, but it's got to make sense. And even though
but if you
well, go ahead.
but if you think about it from, and see, this is kind of where I'm going with my veneration thing. It's like when you venerate something, when you pray to something, you are willingly giving it your energy. And it's kind of like, it makes me think of Monsters Inc.
Yes.
If you're scared, you produce a lot of emotional energy. If you laugh, you produce a lot of emotional energy. Well, when you are in deep prayer, there's a lot of emotional energy and intention going to whoever or whatever
Mhm.
you're sending it to. And so do they not disclose themselves because they want to keep receiving our energy?
Right. And there's a lot of speculation that, I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff about Disney. Walt Disney was a Mason, blah blah blah. And I've seen a lot of material on the fact that Monsters Inc. is a symbolic representation of what these elite do. They
Hmm.
feed off our energy.
Well, and I'm just going to throw something out there that is even a little more weird,
I
but
like weird.
there, I mean, and I'm not talking about channeled information. Okay. I'm just going to put that over there to the side. Um, but there is, I mean, my origin comes out of the new age community, even though, or, at least that's what I do for a living. And that's where I was for a very long time. Um, and there's the whole concept of listening to your inner voice or listening to your higher self or communicating with your spirit guides, that whole genre. And I've, okay, so I get very dirty looks from people when I make this comment, but it's a valid point. I'm sorry. But how do you know who your spirit guides are? I mean, hopefully they're giving you good information, but if you're listening to them, and I mean, I listen to my guides, I listen to, the direction. I mean, I laugh. It's like, well, people go, well, why'd you write this book? It's like, well, they told me to.
Yes.
So, and so if I'm allowing these beings, God, spirit guides, or whoever to control my life,
Right. That's the same thing that they were talking about.
well, who are they? And is it really like God, or is it these extraterrestrials, pushing me into their agenda? I don't
Right.
know.
Always good to be skeptical.
I don't know that I want to know.
Yeah, it is a weird thing, but I do love the book. I love that you kind of stayed away from the geological formations because we hear so much about them and just focused on the mythology because there's some fascinating old stories, and I love to hear them, but it's so tough to really see like these things are passed down for thousands of years within the tribe. Like it's like a long game of telephone. It just seems weird to think that uh, their accuracy would still be intact. I hope it is.
hmm Well, but I mean, I think that they are. Um, I mean, I think that they are. I mean, obviously, there are differences that happen in one area to another. Um, and then there's translating issues. I mean, there are issues, but I feel like the story was actually much bigger and much richer than what we have. And some groups kept this piece, some groups kind of overlooked this piece. But when taken in whole, I think you get a much bigger and richer picture of what was going on. One of the things that people have commented on, is they have just really appreciated that someone has gone through all those dry and dusty books that normally just sit on your shelf because nobody wants to read them.
Hmm. Yeah.
and made, took the material and one put it together, but also make it in a very readable format. Because we made a very sincere decision right up front to not have this book be academic in tone, but be very reader friendly so that you enjoy reading it, like reading Aesop's fairy tales. You enjoy reading it and not, like you're taking a college course, which would be boring.
Well, I mean, I've taken a lot more boring college courses. I wish that was a course offered. You know, I might have stuck with school if that was the case.
Yeah, me too. Oh, wait, I did. But that was because those guys kept telling me, you need to go back to school. Go back to school. Like, okay.
Well, we're getting down to it, but I want to ask you one more question. Do you think, at the highest levels of Catholicism, do you think there are people that know the real translation of the Bible? Because it seems to be fairly cryptic. Do you think that there are things built into it so that someone could pull a higher priest aside and say, hey, here's what we're talking about. This means this means this, but don't tell the people that. Do you think that goes on?
I mean, I think that is totally possible. I mean, if you even think about secret societies, they have little code words or symbols that have a much deeper understanding or representation than what you see on the surface or the little bit that they're willing to share with you. So, I mean, it's entirely possible.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, but then when you think about that, you say, well, if the secret societies can keep these stories intact, why couldn't the Dogons?
hmm But it's not really the Catholics. Really, where you really have to take it is into the Jewish faith, because the Old Testament, where all the really good stuff is, um, is
Yeah.
they've been so terrorized over the years, and moved and whatever, you know, while it is possible, there might have been issues just in preserving the ancient wisdom.
Hmm. Not to mention all the conquistadors burning books and records of any tribes they came across. Ah, that is such a
On the
disaster.
Library of Alexandria. Bye. I mean, could you imagine, a library that was constructed, at the turn of, would it be the millennium? At around zero AD, way
Yes.
back then, and having all of these documents still there for us, because they were collecting old documents and putting them in the library.
Hmm.
Could you imagine? Oh my God.
I know it's really tragic that some just grunt soldier who's told to go burn down this thing would just go ahead and do it. And such, they had influenced the culture forever. It really was a pivotal moment. And I'm sure they didn't think
Well,
of it
and the
that
same
way.
thing happened in China also. And I don't remember what emperor it
True.
was, but it was around 300 AD that this one emperor
Mm-hmm.
went into power, and he wanted to basically rewrite history. And so he burned all the books. And so what burned there
Yes.
too, who knows?
Right. So many people have tried to erase and then rewrite history for their own ego service, and it's a sad reality. But, we got people like you writing books trying to piece this thing back together, and I
Thank you.
appreciate it. Well, Rita, it has been a great talk. I really enjoyed having you on. Would you like to tell the people about your other work or
Sure.
website?
Well, I like to just share that my personal website is www.soulhealer.com. That's SOULHEALER.com. And
Powerful.
basically, it is the portal to everything Rita Louise. So you can get information about the book. I have 3 other books that are on that website, my books. There's information about my radio show. There's information about the services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations and energy work, courses that I teach, everything. Like I said, if you want to know anything that I'm involved in, go there. But Man Made the Chronicles is also available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. We have released it in the Kindle version as well, so you can get the Kindle version
Nice.
there also. But if you want an autograph copy, you would have to order that book directly from me. So,
Ooh, nice. Very cool. Well, thanks so much, Rita. Mythology as history, one of my favorite topics to explore, and we seem to find more truth in these myths all the
exactly.
time. And and hopefully we can talk more again in the future about some of your other work. And good luck in the new age of humanity.
Can you believe it? It's finally here.
I know. All right. Well, thanks. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you. Bye.